Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here with another TCG Tuesday. Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my videos, please hit that like and subscribe button to help me with those analytics. And also, if you want to be notified when this content drops, hit the bell icon so you can be notified as I post videos. And finally, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. All right, so without further ado, today we are going to do another Commander deck tech. This time is going to be a Rakdos deck using Tavistot, Doom of Fools, and Jessica Thrice Reborn. I was sitting around my table of Commander friends not too long ago, and one of them is running a Golgari Superfriends deck. And he was mentioning how it would be super cool to see somebody do like a Rakdos Super Friends thing. And I remember while I was talking to him, thinking like, "Whoa, what would you use for the commander for that?" I mean, you know, with Golgari you have Karth the Lion. So what would you use as a commander for Rakdos Super Friends? And then it occurred to me that Tavistot and Jessica both have partners, so it made sense to run them in a Super Friends deck, considering that they are both Planeswalkers themselves. So what we're looking at today is going to be a Rakdos Super Friends deck using Tavistot, Doom of Fools, and Jessica Thrice Reborn. So let's take a look at these commanders. Alright, we got Jessica Thrice Reborn. This is 2 and a red for a loyalty 0. Jessica Thrice Reborn enters the battlefield with a loyalty counter on it for each time you've cast a commander from your command zone this game. So essentially, she gets more loyalty counters the more times that she or whoever her partner is, if that partner is a... Oh, it doesn't have to be a Planeswalker, it just has to be a commander. So for every time herself or the partner of her it has been cast from the command zone, she's going to come out with a loyalty counter on it, which is great because, you know, if we're going to constantly cycle through Jessica, who has a very powerful ability, she could come back with, I think at one point in time I had her up to 5 loyalty counters. And mind you, I had only cast her from the command zone, I think 2 times, so it was between Tevish and Jessica that brought her up to 5, so super cool. Her 0 ability lets you choose target creature, and until your next turn, if that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage to that player instead. And then her minus X is Jessica Thrice Reborn, deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets, which means that essentially you can, at the time that I had 5 counters on her, I could remove 5 counters from her to deal 5 damage to each of up to 3 targets. This, unfortunately, doesn't mean that you can target the same target 3 times, which, you know, is what it is. I think that would be super powerful. It's this 0 right here that triples damage that is actually the most powerful part of this Planeswalker, because it makes her a terrifying force to reckon with. Next, we have Tavistot, Doom of Fools. This guy is 4 and a black for 4 loyalty. For a +2, you get to create 2 0/1 black throw creature tokens. For +1, you may sacrifice another creature or Planeswalker. If you do, draw 2 cards. Then draw another card if the sacrifice permanent was a commander. And then finally, its -10 is to gain control of all commanders and put all commanders from the command zone onto the battlefield under your control. So, Tavistot, you do not want to allow to get to -10. If it gets to -10, it gets crazy, and it can be a game changer. It could outright win the game for you. You gain control of all the commanders until they leave the battlefield, basically. So your opponents have to find a way to remove their commander from your control in order for them to be able to recast their commander, and it's just a really fantastic ability. So Tavistot, Doom of Fools. Right, next up we're going to take a look at the creatures. And because this is a Super Friends deck, there is actually a very small amount of creatures. I don't remember exactly the count, but I remember it being somewhere around between 12 and 16 creatures. So starting out with the Core Prowler, this is 4 for a 2/2 infect. When Core Prowler is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, it proliferates. So the cool thing about this is that it has infect. So it's a big target. Your opponents are either going to not want you to proliferate, or they're going to kill it as soon as possible just to get it out of the way as quickly as possible. It's a 2/2, which means that it's doing 2/2/2 counters, or 2 poison counters if it hits a player. And then again, when it gets put into a graveyard, you get to proliferate. And so for those of you who don't know, proliferate does include loyalty counters on Planeswalkers. So you can up your Planeswalker counters without even doing anything. Next up, we have Immerstrom Predator. This is 2, a black, and a red for a 3/3 flying. When Immerstrom Predator becomes tapped, exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard and put a +1/+1 counter on Immerstrom Predator, and then sacrifice another creature. Immerstrom Predator gains indestructible until end of turn, and tap it. So this is really cool because you can, on attack, you can remove cards from your opponent's graveyards, but also its own ability allows it to tap to make it indestructible. You're going to have a lot of different tokens available to sacrifice, so it's not unlikely that you'd be able to use that ability. The graveyard hate is the most important part here. This thing I have had, I've played against a Muldrotha deck and outright neutered the ability for it to play anything super big against me just because of this ability. So very cool card. Next up, we have Karazakar, the Eye Tyrant. This is 3, a black, and a red for a 5/5. When you attack a player, tap target creature that player controls and goad it. If you don't know what goading is, it means that until your next turn, that creature attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. Whenever an opponent attacks another one of your opponents, you and the attacking player each draw a card and lose a life. So what we're trying to do here is incentivize other people to attack each other and not me. We are playing a Superfriends deck, so there is some fragility there. So having something like this to allow to kind of force your opponents to attack each other and give incentive for them to attack each other by giving them card draw and giving yourself card draw is just always an win-win in this. Next up, we have Liliana, Heretical Healer. This is 1 and 2 black for a 2/3 lifelink. When another non-token creature you control dies, exile Liliana, Heretical Healer, then return her to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. If you do, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So we're going to take that off camera real quick so we can look at the flip side, which is going to be Liliana, Defiant Necromancer. She is a Planeswalker with loyalty 3. For +2, each player discards card. For -X, return target non-legendary creature with mana value X from the graveyard to the battlefield. And for -8, you get an emblem. Whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So because we're playing Superfriends and we're playing very few creatures, this -8 is actually really incredible, because if you get that emblem on the table, anytime any of your opponent's creatures die, they come back to you in play on the battlefield to help you block or cause even more problems. So super good card. All right, next up we have Planebound Accomplice. This is 2 and a red for a 1/3. You can tap 1 red and put a Planeswalker card from your hand onto the battlefield that you have to sacrifice at the beginning of your next end step. So this seems like a crazy bad card in a Superfriends deck because we want our Planeswalkers to stay in play, but this is a Rakdos Superfriends, so there is ways to get some of the Planeswalkers back. But beyond that, there are certain Planeswalkers that maybe you don't necessarily need to stay in play forever. One of these good examples is Sorin Markov. Sorin Markov comes into play with 4 loyalty counters, and his -3 brings a player at the table down to 10 life. So you could potentially just use the Planebound Accomplice to put a Sorin Markov into play for 1 red as opposed to 3 and 3 black, then bring your opponent's life total down to 10, and you end up sacrificing him at the end of the turn, but what difference does it make because you already got a big play done? So Planebound Accomplice has a lot of really good utility in here. There are certain Planeswalkers in here that maybe you only need to use 1 time. So very good card. Next up we have Sire of Insanity. This is 4, a black, and a red for a 6/4. At the beginning of each end step, each player discards his or her hand. So this is kind of a control mechanism. It's not the best thing for you, but being black-red means that more than likely you are going to run out of steam very quickly. Sire of Insanity just makes it so that your opponents also have no hand to deal with as well. So it very much limits the possibilities of the things that can happen to you. Next up, we have everyone's favorite Sad Robot. This is 4 for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle, and when it dies, you may draw a card. This is super good for ramps, super good for drawing cards, and especially in black-red where we have a lack of both of those, this is just a really great card. Next up, we have Torbrand, Thane of Redfell. This is 1 and 3 red for a 2/4. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent, or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. So this is in here very specifically for Chandras, especially Chandras like Chandra Nalaar. Her +1 allows you to deal 1 damage to any target, which is very negligible. In a format like Commander where you have 40 life, dealing 1 damage is basically nothing. With Torbrand on the field, that damage is increased by 2 to a sizable bolt feeling. So it deals 3 damage instead of 1 damage. And that can quickly become annoying, especially since you can target, I believe you can target creatures with it. So it just makes this, the value of Chandra Planeswalkers much higher, as well as other red Planeswalkers in here that deal damage, like, for instance, Jeska. Next up, we have Valki, God of Lies. This is 1 and a black for a 2/1. When Valki enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card they revealed this way until Valki leaves the battlefield. And for X, you can choose a creature card exiled with Valki with converted mana cost X, and Valki becomes a copy of that card. So this is really interesting because you can copy things with really interesting maybe stacks abilities or other things that allow you to maybe draw or play your cards a little bit easier. But really what we have this in here is the flip side, and since this is the last one, we won't have to pull this off screen. We have this in here for Tibalt, Cosmic Imposter. This is 5, a black, and a red for a 5 loyalty. As Tibalt enters the battlefield, you get an emblem with you may play cards exiled with Tibalt, Cosmic Imposter, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. For +2, you can exile a top card of each player's library. For -3, you can exile target artifact or creature. And for -8, you can exile all cards from all graveyards and get 3 red mana. So there is nothing on this that is bad. This is all incredible with that emblem. So essentially, for +2, we can just outright play whatever we exiled from the top of the decks. It doesn't. It could be anything, right? The -3 allows you to target something. So if there's an artifact that you would like to use, or is just outright going to be a problem for you if it's in play, you can actually kill it and then play it for yourself and make it a problem for your other opponents. You can also exile creatures, and this means that it gets around indestructible, and then turn around and play those creatures, making it your opponent's problems as opposed to your own. And then finally, the -8, exile all cards from all graveyards and add 3 mana. Not only does he exile all the cards, so now you have a huge amount of cards to choose from, but he also adds 3 red mana to help you supplement to play some of those cards. It's just a really fantastic card all around. Now, that's not saying that I haven't played it for the Valki side. Sometimes there are times where you just have to play something and play it soon, and I have played it for Valki. Next up, we're going to look at instants, starting with Chaos Warp. 2 and a red, the owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. So basically just really interesting removal for red. Next up, we have Deadly Dispute, 1 and a black, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, draw 2 cards, and create a treasure token. Just a super good card to help you out. Next up, we have Hero's Downfall, 1 and 2 black, destroy target creature or planeswalker. I'm always big about having multiple options here. Feed the Swarm, stuff like that. Very good cards. This one's no different, creature or planeswalker. Next up, we have Plum the Forbidden, 1 and a black as an additional cost to cast the spell. You may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy the spell for each creature sacrificed this way. You may draw a card and you lose a life. So this is really fantastic for Storm, even though we don't have anything with Storm in here. But one thing we do have in here is a lot of ways to make thralls. And so this is a really good way to utilize those thralls to get some real value out of them. Next up, we have Szat's Will. This is 4 and a black. You get to choose one. If you control your commander, as you cast the spell, you get to choose both. Each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power. And then exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. Then create X01 black Thrall creature tokens, where X is the greatest power among creatures that were exiled this way. This is a super great card for Indestructible, as well as getting an army of Thralls in play. And then finally, we have Terminate. This is 1 red and 1 black. Destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. It's just a really efficient kill spell. Next up, we're going to look at Sorceries. Starting with Aid the Fallen. This is 1 and a black. Choose 1 or both. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, and return target Planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. Again, this is just a way to reoccur some of your dead creatures and or Planeswalkers. Next up, we have Black Sun Zenith. X and 2 black. Put X -1/-1 counters on each creature. Shuffle Black Sun Zenith into its owner's library. This can function as a board wipe, or it can just function as a very annoying card. Because we're playing so few creatures and it's a Super Friends deck, this will more than likely hurt your opponents more than it will hurt you. Next up, we have Blasphemous Act. This is 8 and a red. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, and it deals 13 damage to each creature. Again, this is in here because we are playing Super Friends and very few creatures, so this will likely hurt your opponents more than it will hurt you. Next up, we have Damnation. 2 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. I don't need to repeat myself on this one. Next, we have Decree of Pain. 6 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. Draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. You can also cycle this card for 3 and 2 black, and if you cycle it, all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. This is really cool because you don't necessarily have to cast it for its full cost. If the board is crammed up with a whole bunch of very small creatures, cycling this will do the job just as much as casting it. Next up, we have Faithless Looting. 1 red, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. It has a flashback cost of 2 and a red. Next up, we have In Garruk's Wake. This is 7 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all Planeswalkers you don't control. So this will absolutely hurt them more than it will hurt you. Then we have Mana Geyser. This is 3 and 2 red to add 1 red mana to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponents control. These always end up plussing really, really heavily. Next up, we have Read the Bones. 2 and a black, scry 2, then draw 2, then lose 2 life. This is just a really good, efficient black draw card for black, basically. Next up, we have Reckless Endeavor. This is 5 and 2 red, roll 2d12, and choose 1 result. Reckless Endeavor deals damage equal to that result to each creature, then create a number of treasure tokens equal to the other result. So we can effectively have a board wipe here as well as a Hoard of Treasures all in one card. I see no downsides to this, aside from the 7 casting cost. Next up, we have Elder Spell. This is 2 black. Destroy any number of target Planeswalkers. Choose a Planeswalker you control. Put 2 loyalty counters on it for each Planeswalker destroyed this way. I don't feel like I need to explain this. This is not a card put in here to counter other Super Friends decks. This card is in here so that you can sacrifice your own Planeswalkers to make one of your Planeswalkers very destructive. Between Szat, Jessica, and Liliana, the Dreadhorde General, there are a lot of really fantastic targets for this, and since some of your Planeswalkers will be very low in loyalty at some point in time, this is a great way to get some extra value out of them that your opponents might not see coming. Next up, we have Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. This is 4 and a black. You may cast a legendary sorcery only if you control a legendary creature or Planeswalker. You can put up to 1 target creature or Planeswalker card from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Destroy up to 1 target creature or Planeswalker, and then exile Yawgmoth's Vile Offering. This is a really great way to get something back and also destroy something at the same time. Next up, we are going to take a look at artifacts. Starting with Arcane Signet, cost 2. You can tap it to add 1 mana of your commander's color identity. Then we got Chandra's Regulator, 1 and a red. Whenever you activate a loyalty ability of a Chandra Planeswalker, you may pay 1. If you do, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. And for 1, you can tap it to discard a mountain card or a red card to draw a card. So it's got a good way to loot, and it also supplements Chandras, and this deck has a lot of Chandras. Next up, we have Charcoal Diamond. 2 comes into play tapped. You can tap it to add black mana. We got Commander's Sphere. This is 3. You can tap it for 1 mana of any color of your commander's color identity, and you can sacrifice it to draw a card. Next, we have Contagion Clasp. It's 2 to cast, and when it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. And then for 4, you can tap it to Proliferate. Again, Proliferate hits loyalty counters, but it also hits the -1/-1 counter that you just put on your opponent's creature, and it also hits the +1/+1 counters that are going to be cropping up throughout the course of the game. So it's a very good card. You should have this in every Super Friends deck. Next up, we have Fellwar Stone. This is 2. You can tap it to add mana to your mana pool of a color that a land your opponent controls produces. Next up, we have Fire Diamond. This is 2, enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add red mana. Next up, we have Nevinril's Disc. This is 4, enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap 1 and it to destroy all artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. So you're going to notice that there are a lot of board wipey effects in here. Again, I'm going to go back on the fact that we don't have a lot of creatures, which means that we don't have as much in the way of protection when it comes to our Planeswalkers. So the board wipes in here are to help you clear the board and keep yourself protected so that you don't end up just outright losing. Next up, we have Rakdos Locket. This is 3. You can tap it for a black or a red, and you can tap 4 hybrid black-red and it and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. Then we have Rakdos Signet. This is 2. You can tap 1 and it to add red and black to your mana pool. Then we have Replicating Ring. This is 3. You can tap it for mana of any color, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a night counter on Replicating Ring, and then if it has 8 or more night counters on it, you can remove all of them to create 8 colorless snow artifacts named Replicating Ring, or Replicated Ring, which have the tap add 1 mana of any one color. So because we're running red-black, there is very little in the way of good, effective ramp. So we need as many things as we can get in here in the form of mana rocks or ramp in general to help us get as much mana as possible for recasting commanders from the command zone, as well as just being able to cast more than 1 card per turn. So Replicating Ring is actually really good in here. And then finally we have Soul Ring. Costs 1. You can tap it for 2 colorless. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at enchantments. Starting with Curse of Hospitality. Curse of Hospitality is 2 and a red. Enchant player. Creatures attacking enchanted player have trample. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to enchanted player, that player exiles the top card of their library. Until end of turn, that creature's controller may play that card and may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So this is really good in here because, again, you get to utilize your opponent's resources against them. This means that you might also be able to cast creatures that they have to help protect you, but this also incentivizes your opponent to attack them as well. And thus get the heat off you a little bit because it incentivizes their ability to utilize their cards against them as well. Next up, we have Dreadhorde Invasion. 1 and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass for 1. And whenever a zombie you control with power 6 or greater attacks, it gains lifelink until end of turn. So this is in here as yet another way to protect yourself. We are, again, very low on creatures, so any kind of thing that can stick in play and protect you, as well as, in this case, gain you life if it gets big enough, is going to be something you want to play in here. Next up, we have Fires of Invention. Very infamous card. For 3 and a red, you can cast spells only during your turn, and you can cast no more than 2 spells each turn. You may cast spells with converted mana costs less than or equal to the number of lands you control without paying their mana cost. So this is kind of almost a last-ditch effort, or a very much late game to later mid-game type of card. The Planeswalkers in here are relatively expensive, so being able to play them for free and play multiple per turn can get really out of hand really quickly, but you have to be very careful on the timing of this card, because as it reads, you cannot play more than 2 spells per turn, and you can only play spells during your turn. So it's really important that you're very careful about how you play this. Next up, we have Oath of Chandra. 1 and a red. When Oath of Chandra enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature an opponent controls. And at the beginning of each end step, if a Planeswalker entered the battlefield under your control this turn, Oath of Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this is a great way to slowly but surely whittle down at your opponent's life totals, as well as on ETB, get rid of something that might be a problem. Next, we have Oath of Liliana. 2 and a black. When Oath of Liliana enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and at the beginning of each end step, if a Planeswalker entered the battlefield under your control this turn, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. So we have it in here, obviously, for that sack effect, so we can get rid of something that might be a problem on the table, or at least thin out your opponent's fields. And also, the 2/2 zombie token is great sacrifice fodder and great chump block. And then lastly, we have the Eldest Reborn. This is 4 and a black. Chapter 1 says each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Chapter 2 says each opponent discards a card. And Chapter 3 says put target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So again, just reanimating those planeswalkers. Next up, the most important part, we're going to take a look at the planeswalkers, and this is absolutely where most of the cards are. We're going to start with Angrath the Flame Chained. This is 3 and a black and red for loyalty 4. For +1, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. For -3, you gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap it, it gains haste until end of turn, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step if it has a mana value of 3 or less. So you can potentially get rid of smaller creatures and at the same time use it to attack your opponent. Finally, the -8, each opponent loses life equal to the number of cards in their graveyard, which can be a game winner right there on its own, especially in Commander. Next up, we have Chandra Nalaar. This is 3 and 2 red for 6 loyalty. For +1, Chandra Nalaar deals 1 damage to target player. Okay, so it is target player, not target creature. For -X, Chandra Nalaar deals X damage to target creature. And for -8, Chandra Nalaar deals 10 damage to target player and each creature he or she controls. So it's an effective way to board wipe and also deal a huge amount of damage. Next up, we have Chandra, Acolyte of Flame. This is 1 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. For 0, you can put a loyalty counter on each red planeswalker you control, which is just a downright amazing ability. For -0, you can create 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. They gain haste, and you have to sacrifice them at the beginning of your next end step, which can be very good for incidental damage. And then for -2, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile instead. So the biggest reason we have this in here is obviously the top ability, which is put a loyalty counter on each red planeswalker you control. But the second ability is also pretty decent, especially in certain situations. And the final ability, while there isn't as many targets for it, is still a good ability to cast sometimes. Next up, we have Chandra, Awakened Inferno. This is 4 and 2 red for loyalty 6. This spell can't be countered. For +2, each opponent gets an emblem at the beginning of your upkeep. This emblem deals 1 damage to you, which is just a really fantastic way to nickel and dime them. For -3, Chandra, Awakened Inferno deals 3 damage to each non-elemental creature. For -X, Chandra, Awakened Inferno deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker. If permanent dealt damage this way would die this turn. Exile it instead. Next up, we have Chandra, Fire Artisan. This is 2 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. Whenever 1 or more loyalty counters are removed from Chandra, Fire Artisan, she deals that much damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So this doesn't just include it taking damage. When Chandra, Fire Artisan takes damage, you're removing loyalty counters, so she's dealing damage to any target. Or to target opponent or planeswalker, my bad. But that also includes if you remove it with her own ability. So if you remove 7 loyalty counters using her second ability here, she's also going to deal 7 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Her +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. Her -7 is exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. Next up, we have Chandra, Flamecaller. This is 4 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. For +1, you get to create 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste and exile them at the beginning of your end step. For 0, you can discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many cards +1. And for X, Chandra, Flamecaller deals X damage to each creature. So again, it acts as a board wipe on its own. Its 0 helps you get unstuck when you run out of steam, and its +1 is a more powerful version of the Acolyte of Flames card, so it's just a really great card. Next up, we have Chandra, Heart of Fire. This is 3 and 2 red for 5 loyalty. +1, you can discard your hand, then exile the top 3 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may play the cards exiled this way. For +1, you can have Chandra, Heart of Fire, deal 2 damage to any target. And for -9, you can search your graveyard and library for any number of red instant and or sorcery cards, exile them, then shuffle your library. You may cast them this turn, and you get to add 6 red mana to your mana pool. So the +1 here to discard your hand and exile top 3 cards is another great way to get unstuck when you run out of steam. The other +1 here, deal 2 damage to any target, is super good on its own, but with Torbrand, that's 4 damage, and it's just really messy. And then its -9 is absolutely bonkers. If you have enough of the instants and sorceries in your graveyard, being able to just recast those and have 6 mana available to do so is just nuts. All right, next up we have Chandra, Pyromaster. This is 2 and 2 red. Chandra Pyromaster, with 4 loyalty. Your +1 is Chandra Pyromaster deals 1 damage to target player and 1 damage to up to 1 target creature that player controls. That creature can't block this turn. Its 0 is exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. And for -7, you can exile the top 10 cards of your library, choose an instant or sorcery card, exile this way, and copy it 3 times. You may cast the copies without paying their mana cost. So the +1 is super cool with not only with Torbrand, but by itself, because it makes a creature incapable of blocking. So even if you did 1 damage to a massive 10/10, they now cannot block with that 10/10. With Torbrand, it's even worse. The 0, again, is a great way of becoming unstuck if you get stuck by running out of steam. And the -7 is just bonkers. If you get the right instant, that's just insanity. All right, next up we have Chandra, Torch of Defiance. This is 2 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. Her +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may cast that card. If you don't, Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 2 damage to each opponent. Its other +1 is to add 2 red mana to your mana pool. For -3, Chandra, Torch of Defiance deals 4 damage to target creature. And for -7, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, this emblem deals 5 damage to any target. This is probably the Chandra that does the most work in this deck. Its +1 allows you to exile a card and possibly play it. If you do not, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, which is already fantastic. With Torbrand, that's 4 damage. Its other +1 allows you to get more red mana into your mana pool. Its -3 deals 4 damage to target creature, which is already a huge amount of damage, but with Torbrand, that's 6. And then its -7 gives you an emblem that deals 5 damage anytime you cast a spell. I mean, that's just super good. Next up, we have Duretti, Scrap Savant. This is 3 and a red for 3 loyalty. For +2, you can discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. For -2, you can sacrifice an artifact. If you do, return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And for -10, you get an emblem with whenever an artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. So this one is all good as well. The +2 is really great for looting out cards just in case there's something you need. More importantly, it helps you put artifacts into your graveyard. Its -2 allows you to sacrifice, say, something like a treasure token for something a lot more permanent. And its -10 just basically says you don't lose your artifacts, and that is a phenomenal card. Next up, we have Liliana Dreadhorde General. For 4 and 2 black, it has 6 loyalty counters. Whenever a creature you control dies, you get to draw a card. For +1, you get to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. For -4, each player sacrifices 2 creatures. And for -9, each opponent chooses a single permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. This is always insanely powerful. Not only do you have a draw card engine, you have a way to create black zombies that can die for the draw card engine. You have a way to force your opponents to sacrifice not 1 but 2 creatures, and the -9 is insanity. Next up, we have Lolth Spider Queen, 3 and 2 black for 4 loyalty. Whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth Spider Queen. For 0, you may draw a card and lose a life. For -3, you get to create 2/2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach. And for -8, you get an emblem with whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by one or more creatures you control. If that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. I really like this for the -8 because you have a chance here of swinging in with these really small creatures, and with these small creatures, now all of a sudden, no matter what, they're going to be dealing at least 8 damage in totality, and I think that's incredible. Whenever a creature you control dies, Lolth gets a loyalty counter. Like I said, there are a lot of tokens in here and a lot of ways to sacrifice them and or use them for blocking and so on and so forth. So there's a likelihood she's going to get quite a few loyalty tokens, but she also does her own fun thing where she -3s to create 2/2/1 black spider creature tokens that can be potentially used for blocking and therefore putting loyalty counters on her. So just all around, very cool. Next up, we have Obnixilis of the Black Oath. This is 3 and 2 black for 3 loyalty counters. You can put +2 loyalty. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. For -2, you get to put a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. You lose 2 life. And for -8, you get an emblem with 1 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain X life, and draw X cards, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. One of the things that I keep mentioning is that it's really easy to run out of steam in a red-black deck. These cards are in here specifically to help you get that steam back. Being able to draw cards, lose life is pretty typical for black, and it just helps you to bring more cards back into your hand. Not to mention the 5/5 demon is really good, and obviously the +2 is incredible. Next up, we have Obnixilis Reignited. This is 3 and 2 black for 5 loyalty. +1, you draw a card and you lose a life. -3, destroy target creature. And -8, target opponent gets an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, they lose 2 life. So again, more of that incremental damage, really good way of destroying creatures, and we get to draw cards in case we need more answers. Next up, we have Obnixilis the Hate Twisted. This is 3 and 2 black for 5 loyalty. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Obnixilis the Hate Twisted deals 1 damage to that player. And for -2, you can destroy target creature, and its controller draws 2 cards. So it not only supplements its own ability, but it also destroys creatures that could be problems on the table. Next up, we have Sarkhan the Mad. This is 3, a black and a red for 7 loyalty. His 0 is reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Sarkhan the Mad deals damage to himself equal to the card's converted mana cost. This is one of those examples of a card that you may want to plain-bound Accomplice with, because that -0 could outright kill Sarkhan just by happening. -2, target creature's controller sacrifices it, then player puts a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So you obviously want to make sure you're hitting something that is much more valuable than a 5/5 flyer, but it's a very good ability. And then finally, for -4, each dragon you control deals damage equal to its power to target player. This plays off of another Sarkhan in here that could help you end the game. which is Sarkhan the Masterless. For 3 and 2 red, it has 5 loyalty. Whenever a creature attacks a planeswalker you control, you or a planeswalker you control, each dragon you control deals 1 damage to that creature. We only have 1 dragon in here, but it's further in the ability that makes more sense. And for a +1 until end of turn, each planeswalker you control becomes a 4/4 red dragon creature and gains flying. So that +1, equipped with the -4 on Sarkhan the Mad, can actually end a game for you. And then for -3, you get to create a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying. So we can actually create dragons that will help Sarkhan the Masterless deal even more damage. And then finally we have Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker. This is 3 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. You can pay +1 until end of turn. Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker becomes a legendary 4/4 red dragon creature with flying, indestructible, and haste. For -3, Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker deals 4 damage to target creature. And for -6, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of your draw step, draw 2 additional cards, and at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. So this one's a little volatile. It's obviously really good with the whole becoming a dragon thing. The -3 is really incredible, but the -6 is volatile to say the least. Next we have Sorin Markov, 3 and 3 black, 4 loyalty. For +2, Sorin Markov deals 2 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 2 life. For -3, target opponent's life total becomes 10, and for -7, you control target player's next turn. So likely you're going to play the target player's life total becomes 10 thing. The likelihood that Sorin lives long enough for you to be able to control target player's next turn is slim. More importantly, not even that important by comparison to just bringing a person at 40 or higher down to 10. So that's what it's in here for. Next up, we have Tibalt, Rakish Instigator. This is 2 and a red. Your opponents can't gain life. Has 5 loyalty, and for -2, you get to create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. And the last planeswalker here, we have Zariel, Archduke of Avernus. This is 2 and 2 red for 4 loyalty. For +1, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. For 0, you get to create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. And for -6, you get an emblem with, at the end of the first combat phase on your turn, untap target creature you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. So it's just a very cool, aggressive planeswalker, and it works really well with the token generation in here. Next up, we're going to look at the non-basic lands. Sorry, the non-basic lands. Unbasic. Stupid unsets. All right, we got Bojuka Bog. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard. Taps for black. Blood Crypt is the red-black shock land that counts as both a swamp and a mountain. Canyon Slough or Slough is a red-black bicycle land, so it cycles for 2, enters the battlefield tapped, and counts as a swamp or mountain. Command Tower, you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. Dragon Skull Summit is the red-black check land. Geothermal Bog is the red-black tap land that counts as both a swamp or a mountain. Graven Cairns is the red-black filter land. Interplanar Portal. When you cast a planeswalker spell, you gain 1 life. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap 1 and it to add 2 mana of different colors. Spend this mana only to cast planeswalker spells. Karn's Bastion. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap 4 and it to proliferate. Luxury Suite is the red-black crowd land. Rakdos Carnarium is the red-black bounce land. Smoldering Marsh is another red-black check land that also counts as a swamp or a mountain. Sulphurous Springs is the snow land that counts as both a swamp and a mountain, and also enters the battlefield tapped. Temple of Malice is the red-black scry land, enters the battlefield tapped. And then finally we have War Room, taps for colorless, or you can tap 3 and it to pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity to draw a card. So in this case, you tap it, lose 2 life to draw 1 card. Then finally, we got our basic lands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mountains, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 swamps. So that is the Rakdos Super Friends deck. It is very Chandra-centric, and it is really just about burning out your opponent with as many different sources as possible, using your opponent's cards against them, and other really interesting tricks to kind of just outright burn your opponents out. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. And I think that's it, guys. Until next time, peace.